The wind drags a ghostly hum across the jagged ridges of Mount Taygetus, cold, thin, merciless. The stones themselves seem to whisper of judgment. Somewhere below, a cradle creaks. A newborn's cry shivers into the night. And then, silence. This is not the sound of cruelty, they said. This is discipline. This is order. In Sparta, mercy was a foreign tongue, a weakness left to die beside the mountain. Welcome back to Underbelly Bloodline, where we unearth the stories the world tried to bury. If you believe history hides its darkest truths behind polite lies, then subscribe and open this file with me. The year is centuries before Christ, yet the fear that ruled this place feels timeless. Every breath, every heartbeat was measured by strength. To falter was to shame your bloodline, to tarnish the fragile chain that bound one generation to the next. They called it the law of the strong. But what happens when a city worships strength so deeply, it begins to devour its own children? Here, in this land of iron and ritual, babies were not born into families. They were born into judgment. The elders of Sparta gathered like stone-faced gods, peering down at each newborn, searching for any sign of imperfection. A crooked limb, a weak cry, a trembling hand, and if they found it, that tiny spark of fragility, they sent the child to the mountain's edge. Mount Taygetus did the rest. No cries were written in the records. No graves marked the fallen. The earth simply swallowed what Sparta refused to claim. They called it purification. But to the mothers, those silent figures forced to watch their arms emptied, it must have felt like murder disguised as duty. Because in Sparta, love itself could be a crime. The city did not just fear weakness, it hunted it. In the name of perfection, they turned compassion into a sin. Every smile became a test, every tear a betrayal. And so, generation after generation, the people grew harder, bones like marble, hearts like locked iron. But the ghosts of the mountain never left. Some said at night, when the wind rolled down from Taygetus, it carried the whispers of those abandoned, a reminder that no empire built on blood ever stays clean for long. And perhaps, in some dark corner of history, that same hunger for purity, that same fear of imperfection, still breathes today. In families, in small towns, in bloodlines that will do anything to keep their secrets unbroken. Wherever you're watching from tonight, tell me this. Do you believe a society that kills its weak can ever truly be strong? If you're drawn to stories of bloodlines, broken pride, and the haunting cost of control, subscribe to Underbelly Bloodline, because the past isn't gone, it's just buried. The morning light over Sparta was pale and unforgiving, the kind of light that revealed everything and forgave nothing. Smoke curled upward from the hearths, mingling with the cold mountain air. And somewhere, deep within the stone heart of the city, the cries of newborns began to echo, fragile, uncertain, trembling sounds of life that may not be allowed to continue. For most of the ancient world, birth was a celebration, but here, in Sparta, it was a test. They called it the Gerousia, the Council of Elders, men hardened by war and years of obedience to the state, their faces carved by discipline, their eyes void of mercy. One by one, mothers were brought before them, their infants swaddled in linen. These elders did not coo nor smile. They inspected, like farmers judging livestock. They looked for symmetry, for strength in the limbs, for a defiant cry that promised endurance. But should a child tremble, should its cry falter, the mother's arms would be pried open and her child carried away. Plutarch wrote that such infants were brought to the place called apothetai, the deposits, at the foot of Mount Taygetus. There, the weak were left among the stones to perish, their small bodies claimed by wind, vultures, or time. He said they did it not out of cruelty, but to protect the purity of their race, to keep Sparta strong. Imagine that, a society so devoted to strength that it forgot the value of compassion. But history tells us the same lie in many tongues. It wasn't just Sparta. Centuries later, in the shadow of modern wars and laboratories, that same idea, that some lives are worth more than others, returned, dressed in new uniforms, cloaked in scientific words, eugenics, cleansing, purity of blood. The tools changed, but the fear remained the same. the fear of weakness, the terror of imperfection. Back in Sparta, the mothers were told it was sacred duty. They were told their sacrifice made the city strong. But in the silence after the ritual, when their arms were empty, and the wind came down from Taygetus, I wonder if they still believe that. Because in that silence, you can almost hear it, the soft echo of what humanity loses when strength becomes God. The age of 7. In most places, that's when a boy learns to read, to dream, to cling to his mother's hand. But in Sparta, 7 was when he learned to let go. They called it the agoge, a word that meant the leading forth. But what it really meant was the taking away. At dawn, mothers stood in the doorways of their homes, their faces carved from grief and pride. Soldiers came with torches, and the boys were gathered, trembling, barefoot, clutching at the fabric of their tunics. There were no farewells, only silence, only the soft shuffle of small feet leaving everything they'd ever known behind. The barracks they entered were not homes, they were furnaces. Cold stone floors, walls that wept with dew, an air thick with the smell of sweat and fear. Straw mats lined the ground, if you were lucky enough to claim one. Food came in scraps, barley, black broth, nothing more. Hunger was a teacher here, and mercy was never on the syllabus. Each day began before the sun rose. They trained until the skin on their feet tore, until blood dried on their hands. Pain was constant, but emotion was forbidden. A boy who cried was beaten. A boy who showed compassion, even for a fallen comrade, was ridiculed. The agoge's purpose was simple, to erase the boy and leave behind only the soldier. By night, the barracks glowed with the faint shimmer of torches. The boys whispered in the dark, trading stories of their mothers, their homes, the soft voices they would never hear again. But even those whispers were dangerous. The instructors listened. If they caught you mourning, they made an example of you. And yet, within that cruelty, something strange was born. Brotherhood, the kind forged in fire and deprivation. When you have nothing, no warmth, no comfort, no tenderness, the boy beside you becomes your only world. You share the same hunger, the same bruises, the same secret tears. And in that shared suffering, they built something Sparta could not crush, loyalty stronger than iron. The agoge was meant to create warriors, but it also created ghosts, children who learned too early that love was weakness and that survival demanded silence. So, when you walk the ruins of ancient Sparta, and the wind whispers through those hollow stones, listen closely. You might still hear them. The echo of small voices whispering in fear, punished for the crime of feeling human. Hunger. In Sparta, it wasn't just a punishment. It was a philosophy. Each morning in the agoge, the boys woke to the growl of empty stomachs. Their meals were a mockery of nourishment, a thin barley paste, or the infamous black broth, a soup so bitter it tasted more like iron than food. The elders said hunger built endurance, that it sharpened the senses. But what it truly built was desperation. They called it a lesson in necessity. The boys were told to steal, to take what they needed, bread, fruit, meat, anything they could find. But if they were caught, the punishment was merciless, not for the theft, but for the failure to hide it. That was the twisted brilliance of the Spartan system. They didn't feed the body, they fed the mind, the cunning, the silence, the instinct to survive unseen. Every child learned to mask hunger with calm, pain with composure, to speak less, think faster, and move like shadows through the camp. It was from this crucible that the word laconic was born, meaning a few words. To speak little was to stay alive. To reveal nothing was to remain strong. Silence itself became the highest form of discipline. Imagine a childhood where laughter is replaced by suspicion, where every glance, every movement, every sound is a test. A wrong step could earn a beating, a misplaced word, humiliation. And over years of this quiet brutality, the boys learned to wear masks so tight they forgot the faces underneath. That's how Sparta made perfect soldiers, through starvation, through silence, through the slow death of emotion. They didn't just strip away comfort, they stripped away the very need for it. But somewhere, beneath that iron discipline, humanity still flickered. The quiet sharing of a stolen crust of bread, the unspoken bond between two boys protecting each other from punishment, these were the only remnants of warmth left in their world. And when we look around today, at the men who can't cry, at the hearts that hide behind strength, maybe Sparta isn't so far away. Maybe we've all been taught, in one way or another, to starve what makes us human, because silence doesn't just build soldiers, it buries souls. The sun rose differently over Sparta for its women. In most of ancient Greece, women lived in the shadows, veiled, silent, confined to dim hearths and domestic duties. But here, beneath the wide sky of Laconia, Spartan women ran in the open fields. They wrestled, raced, and threw javelins beneath the same sun that scorched the backs of soldiers. Their bodies were temples, not of worship, but of purpose. They were trained, not for war, but for childbirth. It was said a Spartan woman's duty was to bear strong sons, sons who would stand unflinching beneath the spear. Strength began not in the barracks, but in the womb. And so, these women became iron forged in flesh, the silent architects of an empire obsessed with perfection. Picture them, bronze skin glistening with sweat as they sprint through fields of gold. Their laughter echoes through the colonnades, fierce and free, yet bound by invisible chains. They are praised for their power, admired for their beauty, but valued only for what they can produce. In the shadow of the agoge, they too were trained, but their battlefield was the body, their prize, the approval of the state. They studied poetry, philosophy, and song. They spoke boldly, sometimes even to men, a rare defiance in their world. But even their words were weighed by their purpose. For every gesture of freedom they were granted, another was taken away. They were free, yet controlled, honored, yet objectified. A Spartan mother was told to stand tall when her sons marched to war. "Return with your shield," she would say, or on it. That was not poetry, it was law. To grieve was weakness, to cry was betrayal. And so, behind those eyes of polished steel, the women of Sparta learned to bury tenderness beneath pride. Their strength was both their weapon and their prison. Because even as they defied the softness of other Greek women, they were still instruments, their bodies measured, their wombs watched, their worth bound to the future of the state. Imagine living in a world where your value is written in your bloodline, your body a vessel for someone else's legacy. They called them women of iron, but iron too rusts in time. In the quiet hours of a Spartan night, a single torch flickers inside a stone home. A woman sits alone, her hair shorn close to her head, her body wrapped in a dark cloak. Outside, the streets are silent, the stars sharp and cold. She waits, not for love, but for duty. This was the strange ritual of Spartan marriage. It began, they said, with an abduction. Plutarch wrote of it, how a man would seize his bride, carry her away in secret, and shave her head to make her resemble a young boy. She would be dressed in men's clothing, left in a dark room, and there she would wait. The groom would visit her only in secrecy, under the cloak of night, never to linger, never to rest. When morning came, he would slip away, returning to his barracks, his brothers in arms, his true allegiance, the state. To modernize, it sounds like cruelty, a strange theater of dominance. But to Sparta, it was practicality. Love was a distraction, affection a weakness. Marriage existed for one purpose only, to breed strength into the next generation. Some historians believe the ritual was symbolic, not a literal abduction, but a rite of passage, a merging of warrior and woman under the shadow of discipline. Yet beneath the myth lies a truth colder than legend. Romance was secondary to survival. Husbands and wives often lived apart for years. Even after marriage, Spartan men remained in the communal barracks until age 30. Their loyalty, their laughter, their meals, all belonged to their comrades. And so, the women waited. Imagine that dimly lit home, the sound of distant marching, the weight of silence pressing against stone walls. A wife who knows her husband only in fragments, through hurried whispers and midnight visits. There is no tenderness, only duty. No candle-lit devotion, only the cold echo of state control. And yet, within that shadowed world, something still endured. These women, these wives of warriors, learned to find strength in solitude. They raised children alone, managed estates, and bore the emotional burden of a city that turned love into a transaction. Sparta called it discipline. But maybe it was loneliness wearing armor, because when a society turns marriage into a tool, it starves the very soul it's trying to preserve. Night draped itself over the Spartan countryside, silent, endless, and heavy with dread. The olive trees stood like black sentinels beneath the moon, their shadows stretching across the soil that once ran red with rebellion. Somewhere out there, in that suffocating dark, a boy crouched, dagger in hand, heart pounding like a war drum. He was 16, maybe 17, and tonight Sparta demanded his soul. This was the Cryptia, the hidden crucible where boys were turned into ghosts. Every year, the Spartan magistrates, the ephors, would perform a chilling ritual. They declared war, not against a rival army, not against Persia or Athens, but against their own slaves, the helots. With the stroke of law, killing became legal. The helots, who farmed the land, who fed the city, who outnumbered citizens 10 to 1, were now prey. The Cryptia was their hunter. Young Spartans were sent alone into the wild. No armor, no companions, no comfort. Only a dagger and a ration of food. By day they hid among the rocks and reeds. By night they stalked the fields, watching the helots who toiled, who whispered, who dreamed of freedom. When the order came, they struck. Swift, silent, unseen. Some say it was a police force, a brutal form of population control meant to keep rebellion at bay. Others, Plutarch among them, whispered that it was darker, more ritual than strategy. A blood baptism, a test to prove that mercy had been bled out of the young warrior's heart. Imagine it, a boy raised on discipline and deprivation, now commanded to kill in cold blood, not for survival, but obedience. The first life he takes is not that of an enemy soldier, but an unarmed man. The act stains him forever, but Sparta sees it as cleansing, the final stage of his transformation. He returns not as a child, but as a shadow, a creature molded by the state's will. Historians still argue, was the Cryptia an organized terror campaign, or the fever dream of a militarized society? Perhaps it was both, a machinery of fear designed to remind every slave that freedom meant death, a secret war fought in the silence of night, where neither cry nor conscience could survive. In the end, it doesn't matter what the records say, because the truth is carved not in scrolls, but in scars. The Cryptia proved one thing above all, that when a nation teaches its children to kill the helpless, it's no longer raising soldiers, it's manufacturing monsters. Dawn breaks over the Eurytus Valley, pale, cold, and trembling. The fog rolls low over the training fields, wrapping itself around the forms of young men moving in silent unison. Their spears glint like the first rays of light, but their eyes, those eyes, hold something deeper than pride, something unspoken. This was the sacred brotherhood, the hidden heart of Sparta's iron soul. Every Spartan warrior belonged not just to an army, but to each other. Years of agony, hunger, and silence had forged more than soldiers. They had forged bonds, bonds too fierce to be named, too dangerous to be spoken aloud. In the barracks, they shared everything: food, pain, secrets. They were brothers in arms, but beneath the stone mask of discipline, something more human survived: affection. A forbidden tenderness that Sparta pretended did not exist, yet could not survive without. The agoge had stripped them of childhood, of comfort, of family. In its place, it built a fellowship that blurred the line between loyalty and love. It was said that a soldier who fought beside his beloved fought twice as hard, that the strength of Sparta's phalanx came not only from training, but from devotion. Plutarch once wrote that these bonds were a flame that burned through discipline itself. To die beside one's brother was the highest honor. To live without him, the deepest shame. And so, affection lived in the shadows, hidden behind jest and ritual, behind the clash of shields and the silence of shared glances. In a world where emotion was weakness, they found ways to keep it alive. A brief touch on the shoulder, a whispered word in the dark, a promise that when the battle came, neither would run. Historians debate what this brotherhood truly meant. Was it camaraderie born of hardship, or something more intimate, a defiance against the cold machinery of the state? Perhaps it was both, because even in a city that outlawed weakness, the human heart refused to die quietly. Beneath bronze and blood, beneath law and silence, love found a way to exist, not in poems or letters, but in the space between two soldiers standing shoulder to shoulder, ready to die for one another. That was Sparta's last secret. that behind every iron warrior, there was a beating heart still learning how to feel. The winds that once carried the war cries of Sparta now whispered only through empty courtyards and hollowed halls. The bronze armor still gleamed beneath the sun, but there were fewer shoulders left to wear it. Sparta, the city that once feared weakness more than death, was dying from a sickness it had written into its own laws. This was not a fall that came from invasion, but from within. For centuries, the Spartan code had been carved into flesh and bone, strength above mercy, purity above plenty, discipline above life itself. But the same code that made them invincible on the battlefield became a poison at home. The blood laws, once sacred, began to choke the city's future. Only the pure could marry, only the strong could breed, only the perfect could be raised. And so, generation by generation, Sparta's numbers withered. The wars never stopped. Messenia, Persia, Thebes, and every victory demanded more sons. But there were fewer sons to give. Behind the iron facades of their temples and training grounds, families were vanishing. The city that had built itself on the bones of the unwanted now found its own lineage crumbling into dust. Imagine it. Streets once echoing with the rhythm of marching boots now eerily quiet. Training fields overgrown, their torches extinguished. Women of iron left childless, their wombs bound by rules that no longer served life. Plutarch wrote that, by the time of the Roman conquest, fewer than 1,000 true Spartans remained. A people so obsessed with perfection that they purified themselves into extinction. The image is haunting, a mighty oak, proud and towering, its roots gnawed away by the very soil that once nourished it. From the outside, it still stands tall, but beneath, rot spreads unseen, and that was Sparta's truth. Not a fall from conquest, but a slow, quiet decay. The curse of a society that mistook control for strength and purity for survival. Their decline wasn't a tragedy of war. It was a tragedy of belief. The same ideals that built an empire of warriors left behind only ghosts. And the silence of a city that feared weakness so deeply, it erased even the possibility of love, of mercy, of growth. The stones of Sparta still stand, cracked, silent, and half swallowed by the earth. The wind moves through them like a ghost, carrying the echoes of training cries that once split the air. Where boys once marched barefoot through the dirt, only wild grass grows now. But listen closely, and you can still hear the rhythm of the agoge, that cruel symphony of obedience, pain, and pride. Centuries may have passed, but the spirit of Sparta never truly died. It merely changed its uniform. Today we see its reflection in the drilling grounds of modern armies, in the slogans of nations that glorify strength and despise vulnerability. We see it in classrooms that reward silence over sensitivity, in governments that value order more than empathy. The faces have changed, but the code remains. The agoge was more than a system. It was a belief that the state could shape the soul, that perfection was possible, if only the weak were cut away. Plutarch once wrote that Spartans were born not for themselves, but for their country. Yet the question lingers, who truly owns a human life? The family? The nation? The self? Under the banner of strength, the world has built its own new forms of the agoge, silent, sterile, digital, a place where worth is measured, judged, and sorted, where we still whisper the same ancient phrase, only the strong survive. But strength, real strength, was never meant to be born from cruelty. The ruins of Sparta remind us what happens when a civilization mistakes control for greatness, when love becomes a liability, and when compassion is carved out in the name of purity. The ghosts of the agoge are not gone. They live in every institution that tells us what we must become, and who we must leave behind to get there. So, I'll ask you, what is the price of perfection, and who decides who is worthy to live? As the wind fades across the stones of Tagetis, one whisper remains, the same words that built and buried a civilization. Only the strong survive. But the ruins tell another story. A story that strength without heart is the most fragile empire of all. If these echoes reached you tonight, let them linger. Tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? And if you carry stories of strength and sorrow in your own bloodline, subscribe, because here, on Underbelly Bloodline, the past still breathes, and its whispers never die.